Most people who saw Rex Calloway parked on Delwood Avenue that Tuesday morning assumed he was lost. They saw the leather. They saw the Harley. They saw the patches and the boots and the size of the man who owned them. They saw trouble. They saw something that didn't belong on a tree-lined street of rental houses at 9 in the morning while the garbage truck made its Tuesday round. But Rex Calloway was not lost. He had pulled over because he had seen something through the gap between two parked cars, a woman on a front stoop sitting very still, and beside her a cardboard box, and beside that another, and on the porch behind her a child no older than 6, standing in the doorway with both hands pressed flat against the glass storm door as if she was holding something in place by will alone. He could not have said, in that first moment, why he stopped. He had been on the road since 5:30 that morning, heading south from Lynchburg toward Roanoke on a Tuesday that had no particular agenda other than moving. He had been doing that more lately, moving without a destination, for the clarity that came from roads with nothing waiting at the end of them. He had places to be eventually, not that morning. He stopped because something in the picture on that front stoop did not add up, and he had learned in 43 years to pay attention to things that didn't add up. He watched for 30 seconds. The woman on the stoop didn't move. The child didn't move. The boxes said, this was not a choice. He pulled the Harley to the curb and got off. What happened next would not take long, but it would be felt on Delwood Avenue for a long time after. The neighborhood around Delwood Avenue in Roanoke, Virginia, sat at the edge of a ward that had been changing for a decade in the slow, deliberate way that certain kinds of money change certain kinds of places, converting the two-family into the single-family, the renter into the parking lot, the 30-year tenant into the recent development. The houses on Delwood were still mostly rental, mostly occupied by people who had been there long enough to know the names of the children 3 doors down. But the rental signs were appearing faster than they used to, and the names on the signs were the same name more and more often, Sterling Property Group. The sycamore trees on both sides of the street had been there since before the houses. In October, their leaves came down in a way that was genuinely beautiful for about a week, and then became the problem of whoever lived below them. The house at number 41 had a porch wide enough for a table and chairs, a window box that had held petunias in summer, and a mailbox with a dent in it from a bicycle incident in 2019 that the landlord had never fixed. Rex Calloway had none of this context when he parked. What he had was the eye of a man who had grown up watching his mother pay attention to every surface of every house they lived in the way people pay attention to things they are afraid to lose. He was 43 years old, big enough that the Harley looked correctly sized under him, which was not true of every man who rode one. He had the particular compactness of a large man who had spent years in confined spaces, underground in his case, because he had worked coal for 8 years out of Wise County before his back made that decision for him, and then welding. And then the garage in Lynchburg that he had been running for 6 years, and that was the first thing he had owned that no one could take. The patches on his vest said Ridge Riders MC, Lynchburg chapter. He had been a member for 11 years. He was not currently the chapter's president, road captain, or sergeant-at-arms. He was a dues-paying brother who showed up when it mattered and kept his mouth shut when it didn't, which was the version of membership he had always considered most honest. He was carrying the thing he always carried on solo rides. Not grief, exactly, not anymore. More like a photograph he kept in his back pocket that he didn't need to take out to see. His mother had held the door of a house on Kirkwood Street in Norton, Virginia, with both hands, on a September morning when Rex was 12 years old, while a man from the property management company put a new lock on it. She had held the door because her 3 children were inside, and the man from the property management company had told her the children had to leave too, and she had held the door for 6 minutes before she understood that holding it was not going to change what was happening. Rex had watched from the sidewalk. He had been 12. He had not known what to do. He had never entirely forgiven himself for not knowing. He was 43 now. He had gotten better at knowing. He walked up to the stoop. Before we go any further, subscribe and drop your city and state in the comments. I read all of them. I want to know how far this one goes. Now, back to Rex Calloway on Delwood Avenue. Back to the woman on that front stoop. Because what he was about to find out was worse than it looked. And what he was about to do was going to change what that morning meant to everyone who lived on that street. Her name was Dana Price. She was 37 years old, which she had been for 6 months, and which still surprised her sometimes in the way that ages surprise you when they arrive earlier than you expected them to. She had lived in the house at 41 Delwood Avenue for 3 years and 4 months, which she knew precisely because the anniversary of signing the lease was the same week she had started the last round of physical therapy, and the two events had been threaded together in her memory like things that happened in the same chapter of the same year. She had MS, diagnosed at 32, the relapsing remitting kind, which meant that some months were near normal and some months were not. And she had learned to build her life in the space between the two with the practical resourcefulness of someone who understood that complaining about the weather did not change it. She walked with a cane on the harder days. On the better days she didn't need it, which was both a relief and a kind of cruelty, because the better days were when she remembered clearly what the harder days cost. She had worked as an office manager at a physical therapy clinic on Colonial Avenue until 8 months ago, when a flare had lasted longer than expected, and the clinic, a small practice that had kept her on as long as it could, had finally, apologetically, had to let her go. She was on disability now. The monthly amount, which she did not discuss, was enough to almost pay rent if nothing else went wrong. And things had a way of going wrong. Her daughter, Callie, was 6. Callie had her mother's eyes and her absent father's stubbornness, and a laugh that came out of her at unexpected moments, like something escaping from a room it had been kept in too long. She had started first grade in September, and had come home the 3rd day with a permission slip for a field trip to the Science Museum, and a drawing she had made of their house at number 41, complete with the window box and the dented mailbox, and a figure at the window that Callie had labeled me in the careful printing of a new reader. Dana still had the drawing. It was on the refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a sunflower that Callie had chosen herself at the farmer's market in August. She grew plants on the windowsill in paper cups she had saved from the coffee shop on Colonial, where she used to get her morning coffee before work. The kind of coffee shop that wrote your name on the cup. And she had saved the cups with her name on them for 4 years, and lined them with soil from the hardware store, and planted basil and parsley, and a small tomato that had never quite produced a tomato but had made a determined and genuine effort. The cups were in one of the cardboard boxes on the porch beside her. She had wrapped each one in newspaper so they wouldn't tip. She had $27 in her checking account. The notice on the door said she had until 10 a.m. to vacate. It was 9:07. She was not crying. She had cried at 2 in the morning, alone in the kitchen after Callie was asleep, with the notice in one hand and her phone in the other, while she worked through the list of people she could call and found that the list was shorter than she needed it to be. She had finished crying by 3. She had packed boxes until 5. She had made Callie's breakfast and walked her to the bus stop at 7:45 and kissed her goodbye and told her it was going to be fine, and then she had come back to the house and sat down on the stoop and waited, because there was nothing left to do but wait. The cane was propped against the porch railing. The boxes were stacked. The window box, which she had filled with the last of the season's pansies in October, had been left in place because she had decided that whoever came next on Delwood Avenue deserved something blooming. She heard the Harley pull up and did not look. The trouble with her landlord had not started with the notice. It had started 7 months ago, in March, when Sterling Property Group had sent a new property manager to the Delwood Avenue houses, a man named Craig Teller, whose job title was Regional Compliance Manager, and whose specific skill was finding every legal mechanism available in the state of Virginia for converting month-to-month rental situations into vacancies. He was 38 years old, with the build of someone who had been athletic in college and maintained the habit of being noticed. He drove a company car and carried a clipboard the way men carry clipboards when they want the clipboard to confer authority. He had taken over 4 Sterling properties on Delwood that spring, and by August, 2 of them had turned over. He had come to number 41 in April. He had conducted an inspection, not an announced inspection, an unannounced one, which was technically within the terms of the lease, with 24 hours notice. And he had given 24 hours notice by leaving a message on a Tuesday that Dana had not received until Wednesday, and by then the inspection had already been scheduled for Thursday. He had noted 3 items: a crack in the bathroom grout he had photographed, a window latch that needed replacement, and the paper cups on the windowsill, which he had noted in the report as unapproved modifications to interior window space. He had returned in May and in June. Each visit produced a new report, a new list of technical violations, a new letter from Sterling Property Group's legal office with language about lease compliance and cure periods. Each letter required a response within 14 days, and each response required Dana to take a bus to the Sterling office on Franklin Road and sit in a waiting area and explain to whoever was there to receive the explanation that the grout crack had been present when she moved in, and that the window latch had been in the same condition when she signed the lease. The process was not designed to resolve violations. The process was designed to document a pattern of non-compliance in a tenant file until the file was thick enough to support a formal notice. The notice had arrived in October. It cited 4 violations. 3 of them were items from Craig Teller's inspection reports. The 4th was a late payment, $47 short on the September rent, made whole within 3 days of the shortfall, which the lease permitted, that had been recorded as a breach rather than a cure. Dana had called legal aid. Legal aid had a backlog. They had put her on a list. She was number 23 on the list in a city where number 23 meant 3 to 4 months, and the notice gave her 30 days. The 30 days had run out this morning at 10 a.m. Craig Teller arrived at 9:11 with a locksmith and a man in Sterling Property Group polo shirt who said nothing and wrote things on a clipboard. He parked in front of the house. He got out without hurrying. He had done this before. He looked at Dana on the stoop. He looked at the boxes. "Miss Price," he said. He said it the way he said it every time, precisely, without warmth, the way you say the name of an item on an agenda. She said nothing. The notice was clear, he said. 10 o'clock. He looked at his watch. It was 9:13. "I'll give you until 9:30. We'll need the key before we change the locks." He walked past her up the steps. He tried the door. The storm door opened. Callie was no longer standing at the glass. She had gone to school. Dana had made sure of that. He looked at the window box with the pansies. "The exterior fixtures aren't part of the," he began. "Leave the pansies," Dana said. Her voice was level. She was looking at the street. "They're attached to the property," he said. "Anything attached to the..." Rex Calloway stepped up to the foot of the porch steps. He had not announced himself. He had simply arrived, the way large men arrive when they have made a decision, present, unhurried, filling the available space without demanding it. He was looking at Craig Teller with an expression that contained no particular threat. It contained only attention, the way a camera lens contains attention, precise, unwavering, recording. The lady said, "Leave the pansies." Rex said, Craig Teller looked at him. He looked at the patches. He looked at the locksmith, who had gone still at the bottom of the steps. He looked at the man with the clipboard who was studying the sidewalk. "This is a private matter," Craig Teller said. "I'm standing on a public sidewalk," Rex said. "This is a legal eviction under Virginia State Code. I know what it is," Rex said. His voice stayed level. He had the tone of a man who had been in situations that required that tone. "What time does she have until?" Craig Teller looked at his watch. 9:30, he said. It came out slightly less confident than it had gone in. Rex looked at Dana. "Ma'am, what do you need?" She looked at him. She had the expression of someone who had learned not to expect things from the world and was currently being asked to revise that understanding in real time. "I need the locks not to change," she said. "I need." She stopped. She looked at the boxes. "I need 30 more days. 30 days and I can figure out something." Rex looked at Craig Teller. Craig Teller had his phone in his hand. He was holding it in a way that was meant to communicate that he had people to call. 30 more days, Rex said. The notice was valid. Rex took out his own phone. He made one call. What Craig Teller did not know, what nobody on Delwood Avenue knew that Tuesday morning, except Rex Calloway, was that Rex had saved a phone number 4 years ago after a ride through the Shenandoah Valley with a man named Phil Garrett, who was a housing attorney in Roanoke, who had been with Shenandoah chapter for 12 years, and who had once explained, on a rest stop outside Staunton, the specific legal mechanism in Virginia that allowed a property management company to accumulate inspection violations toward an eviction, and the specific counter mechanism that a tenant had available if the inspections had been conducted with improper notice. Dana Price had been given her inspection notice by phone message on a Tuesday for a Thursday inspection. Virginia code required written notice. Phil Garrett answered on the second ring. Rex described the situation in 90 seconds. Phil was quiet for 4 seconds. Then Phil said, "Don't let him change those locks." Rex looked at Craig Teller. "Don't change the locks," he said. Craig Teller said, "You don't have any. The September inspection," Rex said. Notice was given by voicemail on a Tuesday for a Thursday visit. Written notice required by Virginia code. Craig Teller went very still. The locksmith looked at his toolkit. The man with the clipboard stopped writing. "My attorney is going to want a copy of that inspection report," Rex said. "And the notice documentation. And the September rent payment records." He paused. "All of them." The suited man's confident composure did not disappear, but it recalibrated. The way a calculation recalibrates when the inputs change. Craig Teller said, "Sterling has legal counsel. I'm sure they do," Rex said. He was looking at him with the patient attention of a man who had stopped feeling urgency about this conversation, because the conversation had already been decided. "Phil Garrett will be at your office at 2 this afternoon. If you want to have Sterling's counsel there too, that's up to you." He looked at Dana. She was looking at him with the expression she had not yet learned to form yet. The expression of someone discovering, in real time, that the list of people who would show up for her was longer than she had thought. Craig Teller made a call. Then he made another. The locksmith put his toolkit in his truck. The man with the clipboard walked back to the car. Craig Teller stood at the foot of the porch steps for 30 seconds, doing the arithmetic of a situation that had arrived with numbers he recognized and left with numbers that were different. He said, "Sterling will be in touch with the tenant's representative." He got in his car. He drove away. That should have been where the morning ended. Phil Garrett and the legal machinery and a 30-day extension while the inspection notice was reviewed. That was the resolution. And it was a real one, and it was more than Dana Price had when she sat down on the stoop at 9 that morning. But Rex had made his call standing on the public sidewalk on Delwood Avenue, and the call had been on speaker because he had bad hearing in his left ear from 8 years underground. And the neighbors on Delwood Avenue had their windows open because it was a mild October morning, and sound carries on a quiet street. And by 9:45 the call had traveled the way news travels on a street, where people have lived long enough to care what happens to each other. At 10:15, a woman named Ruth from number 37 brought a casserole dish covered in foil and put it on the porch table without being asked, and said she had an air mattress if Dana needed a place for Callie to stay, and she would hear no argument about it. At 10:30, the man from number 44, who had a truck and a storage unit, and who Dana had spoken to approximately 6 times in 3 years, knocked on the door and said if she needed to move any of the boxes to somewhere safe while the legal thing got sorted, he had room. At 11, 2 more members of Ridge Riders arrived on Delwood Avenue, not summoned, not organized, but having heard from Rex through the chapter's phone chain what was happening on what street in what city, which was enough. They parked at the curb and came up to the porch and sat in the chairs and stayed, because staying was sometimes the only thing required. By 11:30, the street had a quality it had not had since before the Sterling Property Group signs started appearing. The quality of people who remembered that they lived near each other and had decided to act like it. And at 3:45 in the afternoon, when the school bus stopped at the corner of Delwood and Maple, Callie Price came down the steps with her backpack on both shoulders and her lunchbox swinging, and she walked up the street toward number 41, and her mother was on the front porch waiting for her, and the door was open, and the window box still had its pansies, and the paper cups were back on the windowsill in the kitchen, and the drawing on the refrigerator was still held up by the sunflower magnet. The house was the same house it had been that morning. But the morning had been different, and the difference was still in the air on Delwood Avenue when Callie came up the walk and her mother came down the steps to meet her. Phil Garrett filed a formal complaint with the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development regarding Sterling Property Group's inspection notification practices in October of that year. The complaint cited 4 properties on Delwood Avenue, including number 41. An investigation was opened. By February, Dana Price had a new lease with a corrected month-to-month agreement, a waiver of the disputed September late fee, and a letter from Sterling Property Group acknowledging that the October eviction notice had been issued in error. Craig Teller was reassigned from the Delwood Avenue properties in November. The Sterling sign in front of number 41 was still there, but 2 of the other signs on the street had come down, replaced by names Dana recognized. Rex Calloway drove back through Roanoke in March on a ride that had no particular agenda. He stopped on Delwood Avenue. He sat on the bike for a moment, the engine idling. He looked at the house at number 41. The window box had new plantings. Something he didn't know the name of, something purple and early, the kind of thing that pushed up in March before anything else was ready. He pulled back into traffic. He did not knock. He did not need to. He had done the thing he stopped to do. And the doing was enough, and the road was waiting, and he had always been better at moving than at staying. Dana Price still has the paper cups on the windowsill. She added 3 new ones in February, labeled in Callie's handwriting, because Callie had decided she wanted plants of her own, and had selected basil, chives, and something she had been told was lavender, but which Dana suspected was mint. The cups with Dana's name on them from the coffee shop on Colonial are still there too. 4 years of Tuesday mornings, her name in the same handwriting each time, save for reasons she could not entirely have explained except that her name on something, written by someone who had taken the time to learn it, felt like a thing worth keeping. Some mornings there is a knock at your door, and it is the worst thing you imagined finally arriving. And some mornings, on the same day, a man on a motorcycle parks at your curb for no particular reason and asks, "What do you need?" Not what happened, and not "I'm sorry," and not any of the things people say when they mean to help and don't know how. Just, what do you need? And the answer to that question, when someone is willing to hear it, turns out to be the beginning of everything. If this story found you, if you believe that the right person asking the right question at the right moment can change the shape of a whole day, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And has a stranger's one question ever changed something for you? I read every single one.